Beyond the Sky. A story from the collection entitled Cinder Block Houses by E.S. Wynne. Big brother, what is beyond the sky? My little sister looks up from the cerulean handkerchief she's laid out on the damp earth, tiny fat fingers absently turning a piece of turquoise over and over. Beyond the sky, I think, and instantly my mind moves back in time to the lands that my younger, 12-year-old mind finds mysterious and distant, lands that crouch beyond the shoreline of Lake Maloney's, beyond the rim of Table Mountain, that sacred frontier that Randy and I spent so much time exploring, places that remain mysterious until my father points them out years later from the window of an airplane. I wonder if a wizard lives down there, Randy points, and my eyes follow his finger beyond the crumbling edge of Table Mountain and the drop off into volcanic forever that stretches on into endless cerulean sky. Free they wander the hills that sprawl across the shore of Lake Maloney's, crawl through crags, rocky spurs that jut from soft ground. Spurs like the one where, a handful of years earlier than that, my own tiny fat fingers absently turn over a piece of granite and find an oddly wrinkled star of stone, the color of desert sand. It's a selenite rose. Granny looks at it carefully, regards it with the ancient eye of a prospector through the lenses of spectacles that come from a store which will no longer exist a decade and a half later when I help scatter her ashes over the property where the entire family used to gather for Christmas, sometimes Thanksgiving. I don't think of the rose when the ashes slip through my fingers and into the tender breeze. I don't think of the past at all. Only later does my mind wander back to an earlier year, and I am 5 again, stumping after my great-grandmother wherever she goes. It is one of the rare days when Granny manages to lure my grandmother and I away from the television in the old family house, with promises of easily panned treasure and exotic coins dropped or buried by the men of older days, coins waiting silently for the passing of the flat plastic disc of a metal detector to leap up and cry out, "Here! Here!" in the hopes of being freed by wrinkled hands and eager shovels. We are pirates, a crew of Tuolumne misfits, and we prowl the shores of Lake Maloney's, Granny and my grandmother cackling about some joke I am still too young to remember. Beyond the sky, I smile, and my little sister smiles back, mimicking the movement, trying to remember. Well, the blue part above us is called the atmosphere, so beyond that, beyond the sky, is space. Space? She asks. Space, says the announcer, but I turn off the television before he can finish. It is autumn, 1997, and I know exactly what he is going to say. My eyes fall onto the empty paper. It is a lie. There are no frontiers, no new places, no undiscovered countries, only places forgotten by time, places detailed and explored by probing eyes thousands of times in the vast history of mankind and the greater history of our planet. It has all been seen, just as it has all been done, and so completely, so totally, and so long ago, that all the true pioneers and explorers, the men and women who steeped themselves in true firsts, are all long dead. 13, and full of budding testosterone, I shake a silent, angry fist at their invisible graves. Somewhere out there is Atlantis, Randy says, and I can see from the look in his eyes that he means the sunken city that Granny's coins belong to, the sprawl of bridges and buildings built in the forgotten years before the dam that drowned them. Maloney's is deep, my father says as he crosses the rocking boat, Old Bullet, and straps the life vest to my tiny body, gently pats me on the head. I swallow as stories of 10-foot-long catfish swim ominously through the dark waters of my 5-year-old mind. A decade and a half beyond that day, he hands me a dusty tome in the slanting light of his arcane cinder block bedroom. The City of Maloney's by Milo Bird. This was written by Dave Bird's grandfather, he says, and I bristle visibly, vowing to remain in total ignorance, rather than touch that book for another decade, perhaps more. The anger has lessened in my 20s, but my 18-year-old mind hates Dave Bird with a passion, especially in the summer. He is the wrinkled officer who cackles in my mind, even as he takes my adopted brother and his best friend away in handcuffs, and places that midnight call that every sleeping mother fears. Mrs. Winnick, it's about your son. We pay dearly for our moment of novel rebellion. Never again will we steal down to the donut shop in the dark hours before dawn to get our hands on the freshest pastries the moment the donut hole opens. Never again will we burp loudly in abandoned shopping centers like the noisy boys we are. "Dave Bird!" I hear myself shout a year later, and the sound echoes off a flat and distant wall. My adopted brother yells back, "Dirt road! Paved sidewalk!" That's where you find the stars, I tell my little sister. Space is huge, maybe even endless. It's full of planets and moons and chunks of ice and stone that circle stars and form galaxies. It holds everything in the universe, everything you see on shows like Star Trek or Stargate. "Oh," she says, rather matter-of-factly, and nods her head like an old sage, wispy hair caught for a moment in the breezes of an early spring. It is a move that is innocent, even as it hides an inability to admit that she doesn't completely understand. She is too young to remember. "Do you think it'll rain?" Randy asks, and I study the clouds with a pretender's eye, mimicking the look Granny gives the selenite rose in front of a younger me. High above, the sky is distended and dark. The rim is moving fast, but to my young, unspectacled eye, it still seems a long way off. "Clouds move fast," my father says as I step out of the car and look up beyond the control tower to the wispy white cirrus above. My 7-year-old mind hardly grasps the concept. Clouds are too high, too nebulous to care much about. When I am 22, clouds become very important, and for the same reason that they are important to my father. But at 7, they are ephemeral, less interesting than the yellow pad of ruled paper and the marker in my hand. "Is that where you fly, Dad?" I ask, and he shakes his head. "Clouds can be dangerous," he says. "It's safer to stay away from them." 5 years later, standing on the rim of Table Mountain, Randy asks me, "Do you think it will rain?" And I do not remember my father's words. "Nah," I say. "Clouds don't move that fast." And even erring on the side of caution, clambering down the sheer face of the mountain as quick as we can, we still get caught in the storm. Dressed only in loose-fitting camo fatigue jackets, shorts, and shirts, we are unprepared for the mammoth fall of hail that pelts us and leaves us shivering, chattering, two pretend soldiers clinging to one another for warmth. It is a long walk back home, along Chicken Ranch Road. "Big brother?" My little sister looks up at me again, and I gently fold the corner of the page over on the book I've been reading. Broken Angels is the title, and it reminds me of the way students break lines of beautiful verse at the urging of their instructors, beating every word until it cries, "No more, please," and surrenders its hidden meanings on butchered hands and raw knees, shaking and bleeding, its wings broken, its face bruised until it is no longer beautiful, can no longer be looked at the same way again. Some lines should be spared the torture, I think, their words free to explore the stars without the exploratory surgery of the keenest scalpels in the box of the ivory tower. 4 years later, I am teaching my little sister, now 9, how to beat the meanings out of verse that were once angelic, verses that now yield themselves up to me without a fight. "If space is what is beyond the sky," her 5-year-old self asks me, "then what is beyond space?" "Nothing," my father tells me. I am 5, and I have just brought him the corpse of a kitten I'd found in the yard. Teary-eyed, I ask him what happens when we die, and he says, "Nothing." I blink, uncomprehending, and he looks away, turns the long-handled screwdriver buried like a knife in the guts of a broken chainsaw. "It's like sleep," he says, and he cannot look at me. "Only you don't dream and you never wake up." 19 years later, I remember this moment, as I help him put new gravel on his mother's grave and polish it clean with a can of chainsaw bar lubricant. His face has more wrinkles now. There are tears in his eyes, and as he turns to my uncle, he says, "She's probably smiling, seeing all three of us out here right now." My uncle nods somberly. His world is full of stars and planets, of architecture and the future. To him, a grave is a way to force the world to remember the departed, a monument to the greatness of an individual who otherwise was nobody. To him, life is momentary, but gravestones are eternal, and to be forgotten is the only true death. 15 minutes before, the first spray of chainsaw lubricant hits his mother's grave. My uncle tells me that when he dies, he wants me to buy the biggest grave marker I can, something grand and cast in marble that will stick out of the earth in defiance and jab at the sky, refusing to let the memory of a dead man be forgotten. Something that the Mexican families will look at and wonder what white man is buried under it, he says, and I try not to think about what that means. He has no children, no spouse. It is up to me to make sure the world remembers him in the way that he would want it to. That's Stephen O'Bridge, and that's Murphy's, that's Arnold, and that's Angel's Camp, my father says, killing the mysteries of my childhood one by one. We are in an airplane, flying over Table Mountain and Maloney's Lake. I am 13, and I know there is no undiscovered country, no frontier, no unseen glory. There is an answer to every question. You just have to find the person old enough to remember it. Sitting with my little sister, I know that in this moment, I am that person. I am old enough to remember that there is no such thing as beyond space. I have read the books, written the articles, listened to Stephen Hawking and Carl Sagan, with all the devotion my father's mother used to show for her preacher, all the interest and wonder Granny used to show for nature, for plants and stones. I am old enough to remember what it is like to have mystery, to look at the sprawling lands beyond Maloney's Lake and see distant worlds, to know that there is a place in the wilderness 20 miles from my home, nebulous and invisible to me, called Jupiter, where people get lost sometimes, and 6-gun cowboys still ride their horses. I remember, and I wonder if sometimes it is better not to lose those mysteries, better to live in ignorance of worlds that still seem new and magical, than to know the answers of those old enough to remember. I look at my little sister, and in a way I see a younger me. I may be old enough to remember what is beyond space, but I will not be the one to take away her mysteries. Beyond space? I ask, then smile gently. I have her full attention. Even the sphere of obsidian in her hand has stopped moving. Maybe Atlantis, I say. Maybe a lake with a sunken city hundreds of feet beneath it, or a mountain that stands defiant in the clouds, where you can look beyond to other lands and see grandmothers and great-grandmothers picking through rocks for buried treasure like wrinkled and cackling pirates, or hills full of unread books and wizards, where time passes slower, and all our yesterdays are still todays.